Our third speaker is John Della Bosca, who probably needs less introduction than anybody else, who has held senior ministerial positions in the New South Wales Labor government from 1999 to 2009. During that time, amongst other things, he was Minister for Health and Minister for Disability Services, and I think was the instigator of the no-fault insurance scheme in New South Wales, and certainly for the redevelopment of the large institutional services in New South Wales and significant injection of funds into the disability service system there. He resigned in 2010 and became, somewhat controversially, the campaign director for the National Disability and Carers Alliance, and is aiming now to assist in the establishment of the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And he's now heading up the campaign, Every Australian Counts. So over to you, John.
Thank you. Well, thanks very much, everybody. And I think the starting point for this discussion, from my perspective, is that a campaign is about solving a problem. And what is a problem? So I've been kindly introduced as having a previous life. And my predecessors in a previous life, very directly, in a sense, returned from a conference left the conference in 1946. It was the post-war ALP conference, where they lost by one vote a motion to make sure that the Commonwealth Government honoured its promise. The Curtin and Chifley governments honoured their promise to return the taxation powers to the states after the war. And losing that vote, that led to a series of changes that we now know as the new federation, and started something that we call vertical fiscal imbalance. Probably it started a long time before that, but it certainly accelerated it. So essentially, the first of our problems is that the people who are responsible for disability support don't have the money, don't have the capacity to fund it. That's the first problem. It's a simple fact that the largest of our states has a budget of a little under, I can't remember what the last New South Wales budget was, but around about 40 billion, which is a little over 10% of the Commonwealth budget. Starts giving you a sense of the level of difference. And so you have that heritage now for a long time, 3 generations, where the states are the providers of services, but they have scarce funds in order to deliver on them. That's created a culture in disability in particular, I think, and it's very important for us to sort of focus on disability as distinct from the other areas of social policy and the way in which they've been regarded in Australia in that same time period. That disability, as Bruce has alluded to, has one of the features of absolute best practice, the need for early intervention. That any system which involves rationing, by its nature, is the opposite of best practice, which I suppose is worst practice. I've never heard it expressed that way. So we have a system in Australia and have had it for quite a long time now, apart from the debate over institutionalisation and deinstitutionalisation, apart from other important debates in disability, just in terms of the resources available to do the job, we have 2 things. First, the people responsible don't have the money. Secondly, their response to not having the money is to simply ration the system. Which leads to the other key finding of the Productivity Commission report, which is again alluded to by both Rhonda and Bruce, which is when you talk about the size of the Productivity Commission's findings and the approach the Productivity Commission took, because they took it because that's the way they think the system needs to be funded, what you find is a simple proposition that at a national level, disability funding is around about half what it needs to be. Now, if you think about that and applied that to universities, applied it to high school education or primary school education, applied it to the healthcare system, there would be absolute outrage if the funding allocated was half of what real need was. And yet we know from the numbers that's exactly what we've been doing in disability for at least a couple of generations and probably really forever. So there's the fundamental political problems. The fundamental political problems is that the organisations, the state governments that are responsible for disability can no longer do it, haven't been able to do it for a long time, so it has to become a national responsibility. And secondly, an artefact of that reality has been that it's been massively underfunded, rationed and led to absolute worst practice in service delivery, or near enough to worst practice in service delivery. So what's the other thing that's been going on? And I think it relates to Rhonda's point, and she talked about every Australian. And this is probably getting into somewhat of a controversial view of speculating about the ideology that has allowed this to happen. we like to think of ourselves, we characterise ourselves. When I say ourselves, I'm talking the national we. Australians tend to characterise themselves as people concerned with fairness and equity, and we've all heard those things from politicians of all ideological and political persuasions, and in fact all of us tend to say it from time to time when we feel particularly misty about the national character or whatever we conceive the national character to be. And yet, again, applying that idea that if you think about health, you think about education, think about universities, you think of any of the things that are measured by the OECD as a national standard, Australia does pretty well. In a lot of these social policy areas, I dare say that Australia is one of the leaders, usually in the top, certainly in the top 5 or 6, and often in the top 3 or 4, in all sorts of areas of social policy. But in disability, we are consistently a very poor performer. We're consistently in the bottom 25% and in some areas below that. So that tells you there's something fundamentally wrong here. I speculate that there's probably an ideological element going back the way Bruce did that goes back a long way into the Australian psyche. I can only speculate that when those gentlemen returned from the National ALP conference to find that their state governments were no longer going to have much money, that it was also a society which was intensely and deeply and fundamentally racist, and also where, frankly, we don't like talking about it much, but eugenic views of the world were almost assumed as the starting point for the way in which debates about health and what we now describe as debates about disability were conducted. And so I think really what we've got here is something that is part of a deep national shame that we really need to start thinking seriously about and communicate as a national concern. It's something we have to make good on because we're starting from a long way behind. It's not just that we're bad at service provision, because in a sense, if you apply it across the board, we're not that bad at it. What we're bad at is completely and viscerally ignoring the needs of Australians living with disability. And I say the we there in a very unkind way, applying to everybody when I'm probably talking to people that are fairly deeply concerned about it because you're all here. But I am making a bit of a judgment as to how we could have got here politically, and I think you have to sort of have some explanation that's as good as it is. The other point, of course, for why we are where we are, Bruce has already made the point, the compensation schemes work all right, which is another clue to the whole reason why we think that's fair enough. If you're disabled because of an accident, we think something should be done about it. You should be compensated for it. And so I think that's another clue to the visceral ideological reasons why we've so badly ignored this area of social policy for so long. But it also means the states are the owners of the insurance policy schemes, the insurance schemes, the statutory insurance schemes. So we need to do something about that, and the Productivity Commission proposes to do that. So that's where we are, that's the problem. The Productivity Commission provides the solution, and what we're doing is campaigning to get a government to implement the Productivity Commission, or substantially implement the Productivity Commission's recommendations. Now, they haven't made their final recommendations yet. We don't exactly know in detail what they'll even be, but we speculate from the fact that the interim report is pretty good, pretty solid, that the final report will detail things that we would very much like to see implemented as soon as possible. So running through where we ended up and where we've ended up as of now, we're in the rundown to a period where, as Rhonda says, we really have an opportunity over the next 3 to 6 months, perhaps a little bit longer, perhaps even a little shorter, but I suspect a bit longer, to make an impact, to get the Commonwealth Government to come to an implementation or to deliver an implementation program which is meaningful, that they are going to put in place a scheme, a starting date and a program in order to do that, because it's a big job. For a start, just transferring the schemes across from the states is a massive job in terms of the bureaucratic issues, let alone the functional legal issues and everything else. So all those things need to be started pretty quickly if we're going to do this at any time like the next few years. So when the Productivity Commission report came out, our campaign needed 4 things to happen. First, the report needed to be good, and it was. Second, the report needed to be embraced by the government, and it was. Not quite as warm an embrace as we wanted. Yeah, Rhonda's frowning at me, but no, I think it was a reasonably warm embrace. There was a bit of a move back from it after a couple of days. And of course, I think importantly, and to be fair to the opposition, a fairly strong representation of bipartisanship from the opposition. So the opposition spokespeople were pretty strong, saying that they would support the initiatives if the government were to pursue them, or they pursue them themselves if they were in government. Last but not least, which was critically important to us, and I didn't think we'd get it, was very strong support from the commentariat. So what we found is that there is this sense, I think, amongst people, a wide variety of commentators from the most conservative to the most left-wing, if you like, journalists, social commentators, columnists, that something needs to happen in this. Something needs to change. There is something wrong. So we had this quite generous kind of response from the media and from commentators, and that was a pleasant surprise. So that set us up for a rundown into, I think, a dual exercise. We are running I wouldn't have said this, only a few years ago, even only a year ago, I think, when I was first engaged to do this job. We are running a social media campaign. A year ago I would have said, don't even ask me what that is. But it means you've got a web page and you're getting people to Twitter and you're getting people to participate in the virtual world rather than necessarily the march down, Federation Square in Melbourne, yes. So we've got that. It's called, if anyone doesn't know it, it's everyaustraliancounts.org.au. And that's, I think, essentially the key starting point for the rest of what we're doing. We've got the commentariat, we've got the political parties. We need to get Australians to understand that something needs to be done about this, because only they can put the pressure. We can, Bruce can, Rhonda, me, anyone can go down, and Robert can go down and talk to anyone we like, Jenny Macklin, Bill Shorten. They're not going to move. We live in a democracy, whether we like it or not, and I like it. We live in a democracy, and they're going to move, they're going to respond when they feel that people want them to respond. They respond in the way that they think they're going to make judgments about the way in which they can take policy based on what public support there is for certain policy initiatives. So we need to get the Australian people to think about this in terms of their own language about fairness, and to speculate about why this major unfairness could continue to exist, and to explain that in as simple terms as we can. So that's our website. The other thing we're doing, following on from that point, is we're making sure that we go and see, or we provide people with disability, living with a disability, the training to go and talk and recruit members of parliament as their champions. Rhonda made the point, we're in a new, it's suddenly become fashionable to say new paradigm. It was very fashionable for a while. We're in a new paradigm where, of course, every member of parliament is, I think it's a misquote of somebody famous, I can't remember now, but every member of parliament is a king or queen, because any one of them can change the whole course of the parliamentary future of the government or the opposition. So it's not just the independents. So we're recruiting champions in all the political parties to support our cause. So essentially that's what we're doing at a political level. We're trying to overcome, I think, I won't say centuries, Bruce went all the way back to Elizabethan times, but we're trying to overcome many generations of inbuilt prejudice against doing something serious to make sure people with a disability have independence and experience the kind of fairness that every other Australian expects as a matter of right. Thank you.